Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers largely live in an anything goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Ryan Buckle. Ryan is the purveyor of vodka for Top Shelf International, and at the time of the interview, he was actually the marketing director for various different aspects of the Lion business in Australia. From the tone of the podcast, you can tell what an open and honest guy that Ryan truly is, and his willingness to provide genuine advice for those who are willing to listen. That openness gives us an insight into the glamorous and the not so glamorous side of traveling internationally for work. And he also tells us the importance for your professional career about working at the right place with the right people. We do touch on COVID-19 and the impact on sales for supermarket type products, as well as discussing the importance of the relationship between retailers and manufacturers. Now, this is the first ever video podcast for this show, so I hope you enjoy it. But without further ado, Ryan Buckle. Record this computer. Amazing. So, welcome to the podcast, Ryan. Thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight.
Not much else to do in Melbourne, Zach, so happy to join.
Yeah, that's right. So just for everyone who's not in Australia, because we're all very well aware, but Victoria's on quite a strict sort of stage 4 lockdown. So Ryan, how many weeks has it been since you've been outside?
Well, outside is a daily occurrence. It's just the amount of time you're allowed to spend out there. So it's an hour a day and not more than 5 kilometres from your home. Wow. I'm pretty fortunate where I am in Melbourne, pretty close to the beach and some outdoor areas. But, it's a bit strange. I can't say I've done it before. Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like I know you're not in prison and I know it's not prison, but, they get 1 hour of yard time and, they're contained to a certain environment. So you only have your 5Ks. And I just remember early stages of COVID in South Australia. We weren't as strict as you are now, but, kind of walking past people on the other side of the street and everyone was avoiding each other like crazy. I can only imagine it's even worse. And you mandatory mask wearing? Yeah, mandatory mask wearing, which doesn't necessarily work particularly well with sunglasses when you're outside. So it's kind of the mask and no sunnies, or if you go to sunnies, it's you get quite fogged up as well. So it just makes the air outside even more blissful.
Hadn't thought about that. You have a stylish looking mask, or?
I wouldn't say stylish. I don't think you can put any mask in stylish. I know people have had a bit of a crack at the designer angle, but I've just got an old it's like a face sock that I wear when I'm on the motorbike, so I just use that. Anything that covers your face, really. People are using scarves or even their T-shirt at times. You see people walking around in stores when they've forgotten one, and then you've got the surgical looking ones. It's, not great. But anyway, greater good, as they tell us. Yeah, perfect. So, so I know quite a bit about you because, I've worked with you before. But did you want to give everyone a little bit of overview as to who you are and what your current role is? Yeah, so I've been in FMCG pretty much the entire time from a career perspective. Came through a couple of sales gigs as a marketing graduate. It was a normal sort of pathway, I would say, in those days. You sort of went into the coalface of like a territory manager job, so you could appreciate what it was like trying to sell the things you would market in the future. And then just a series of assistant brand manager roles, brand manager, senior brand manager, the same old story. And a couple of big organisations, Mars and Lion, over the last sort of 10 plus years. So a very standard marketing career, I would say, to this point. So you tend to just go in different levels of jobs, and then if you're lucky enough, you might get an experience outside of the country of birth, which was great at Mars. I did 4.5 years stint in Asia Pac, and then back into a local business now, I would say. It doesn't necessarily have the influence of a big multinational, but is a very big player in the Australian market on its own. So, that's the basic sort of pathway, I would say. lots of different brands, different categories. Pet care and dairy might seem a bit different, but they are largely the same in terms of what they're offering the consumer. So, it's pretty stock standard.
Yeah. So just going back to what you said earlier. So you did a Bachelor of Business Marketing and IT at Charles Sturt University.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that and I thought, how come you had the combination there? Was that like a deliberate strategy, or was it just something that had occurred, almost serendipitously? Or
yeah, there was an accountancy stint before that as well. So
okay.
That probably just even complicates the story even more. But I think wasn't quite boring enough, maybe, no offence to the accountants out there, to be in that space yet. I'm actually glad, though, in hindsight. I mean, most organisations are very centred in the P&L, so if you can wax fluently in that space, it's good territory to be in. Marketing was more just from the creativity standpoint. I didn't really know at the time. I think when you leave school, it's sort of like, what's the thing that's going to give you the best opportunity to access some different career paths. And then maybe at the time I was thinking that IT was going to be big in terms of the application of IT for business. So I didn't really take it any further than that. But I mean, you look at today, it's online is going to be a big thing. It definitely has been in Melbourne for the last 8 weeks with people's restricted movements and I guess the scarcity of wanting to go into store. But that was kind of the background. But it was always, marketing was sort of where I wanted to end up. I think when you have a bit of creativity as a natural bent, there's an entrepreneurial spirit probably that goes with it.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to cultivate that with someone else's money and organisational resources. So that's probably how it all came about. I would love to say it's by design, Zach, but you just sort of fall into these things when you're coming out of your teenage years and into your early 20s, and that's sort of the path that I landed on.
Okay, so did you find that you had a knack, or you kind of went that way when you were growing up, or it kind of sounds like you did in a sense?
A little bit. I think you sort of get probably more so today, but you definitely, opening an internet browser or the paper every second day and reading about some billionaire entrepreneur that was living in a shoebox only 5 years before. They don't talk about the ones that were catastrophic failures, but I think it's a form of expression for me. I think that I have never been an artist, but I imagine the process of creation is a big part of the journey. And I think, fortunately, in marketing, particularly in FMCG, you get the opportunity fairly regularly to sort of put your stamp on something. So I think at a core level, it probably comes from that. And then maybe also for me, a bit of a fascination about how consumers behave and, the psychology that goes on behind it, brands, and, when you overlay the financial part of brand as well and how it creates enormous value for organisations. I think when you put that big melting pot together, it's sort of, I can look back with 20/20 vision and say, I can kind of work out why I've ended up where I have. But that's the basic probably story to it. Yeah.
And then so you moved into industry. Did you want to tell us about your first role as a product specialist?
Yeah, so I was still in the sales realm at that time, and it was just a personal move to get back to Albury, where I'm from, so up on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. It's a nice part of the world. And I think I was sort of probably more interested in that stage of, facilitating a lifestyle necessarily than a big career move. So I spent quite a bit of time back in Albury in that role. Now it's with the pharmaceutical company. So Janssen Sealags, basically owned by Johnson & Johnson. Massive organisation, great history. And I was really drawn to the J&J history. It's a typical sort of wartime story and how it was built. And for me, it was just probably a higher level of selling. I thought if I could convince health practitioners to prescribe one medication over another through the science, then it would set me up for sales jobs long term. But I think I got to the end of that little journey and I thought I just need to get overseas and probably broaden the horizons a bit. I think it's one of the first lessons in life that you learn, that perspective's hard to gather when you stare at the same thing all the time. So I went overseas for a couple of years, and then that's how the Mars journey sort of started from there. But it was an interesting little sojourn. I don't think I'd go back to pharmaceuticals in a hurry. My sister, incidentally, is a marketer in pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
It's just a very different world. It's a bubble, and there's lots of constraints and restrictions, like there should be, right? I mean, you're talking about human health and care, so it was a bit probably too cut and dry for me.
Is she in Australia at the moment?
She is, yes.
Okay.
So she's in Melbourne too. So it's they're in sort of more in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, those kind of things. So really interesting subjects, but wasn't probably like the accountancy career wasn't quite ready to be what I thought was boring at that stage.
Yeah. The only reason I asked is because I could imagine it'd be a whole different kettle of fish with the regulations and the way you can market things in places like the US.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, it changed quite significantly in the time that I was at Janssen as well. I think, the Australian Medical Association was pretty keen to blunt some of the influence that the big pharma companies were having in regards to, the perks of the job, I would say. So just trying to get it back to being about the patient and the care of the patient. And that's what it should be about, right? And then forcing the pharma companies to develop the best possible products that would be reflective of the care that you're trying to deliver. So I completely understood where it was going, but I think historically it had felt a bit different to that.
Yeah. Oh, it's nice to hear that, like the company with that story. Yeah, it wasn't quite like that. So you mentioned then that you then moved from Australia. Where did you move? So you moved to the APAC region with Mars?
No, this is before Mars had even started. So I think I got to like the November of 2005, maybe.
Okay.
A few of my mates had sort of taken off to Canada to do a ski season. So that's literally like I'd quit a sales job in sort of big pharma corporate world. And then 4 weeks later, I was bumping chairlifts at Banff in Canada. And it was awesome, right? I wouldn't say it was a development move, but it was certainly brought things back into focus. Up at, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning, it might be minus 20, and it was a completely different world. But it was nice to, I sort of felt like I was back at university again. It was nice to spend a bit of time meeting new people, and I've still got friends from that journey that I talked to today. It was just cool doing something different for a while. And then so I spent the summer in Toronto and then went over to the UK for a bit and then got home at the end of, the start of 2007. And that's how the Mars journey kind of started. My father worked for Mars for 27 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, like I didn't realise till I got there, but I mean, I was largely brought up in Mars, the values of the Mars organisation and our own family values, scaringly similar.
Yeah.
So, I think at the stage it was just to join and do sort of 6 or 12 months, get some cash back up and get back on the travel boat. But that didn't end for about 9 years. And I sort of turned around in 2015 and went, wow, what happened? But amazing organisation. I was in the pet care business all of that time, albeit in different regions. But it's nice working in categories and with organisations that have a real purpose around. For Mars, it's the magic of pet ownership. Massive dog and cat fan. I have 2 dogs. Taking them to work and the things that you're doing, deciding on formulations and packaging and all that. It's kind of like if it's going to work for the pet or the pet owner, it's an easy way to make some judgment calls. So. It was a really fun time. I was just, you get to a point in your career, I think, where you got to evaluate the personal side of it as well. And it was, lots of travel and not home a lot. And I think to be at your best, you need to find the right balance where you've got the personal stuff in order and then you're complementing your life with the professional challenge. Whereas I felt like the thing had got a bit out of whack. It wasn't Mars's fault. It was just more that was the path that I was on. So that's what caused the change.
So you entered the sort of pet care industry with Mars at a brand manager level.
Yeah, assistant brand manager actually. It was the first gig that I bumped into, and then I was working in the specialist business, which at that time in 2007, like the pet stocks and the pet barns, they were only really starting, like the specialty retail in pet food. It was really dominated by the old agricultural stores like the Landmarks, and then obviously Coles and Woolies had a growing presence in that area. But if I look at it now, it's like amazingly dynamic. I mean, Coles and Woolies are still quite big, but the pet specialty channel is going from strength to strength, and the online presence now with Pet Circle and the like, it's a testament to how quickly FMCG categories can evolve once the technology and market conditions are there.
Yeah. So So you landed the first assistant role, and then how did you sort of progress throughout? So you moved to brand manager, senior brand manager, and then into portfolio manager for all of the dog brands. I just want to try to understand how you moved throughout those, and I guess learn lessons for everyone.
Yeah, there's a bit of good management and there's a bit of good luck, I think, that goes with most of your careers. I think the key thing is curiosity in the first instance is something that you really need to cultivate early in your career. I think trying to understand how businesses work and how the sales team interact with the customer and how factories work, and respecting a bit of the history, but to really understand how the organisation's functioning and then maybe how you can make it a little bit better. I think spending a fair bit of time trying to understand you as well, because it's easy in your career because you see all the glittering lights around you where people are either progressing really quickly or into big jobs and big titles. And sometimes if you think about that a bit too much, you can end up on that path too, which isn't necessarily the best version of yourself. So I think if you put those two combinations together, which I can't say in the early days that I was perfect at either of them, I was probably just fortunate that I had good people around me that sort of guided me on that path of, okay, you've done a good job here, now you move on to the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. And I think if you show enough of the good things and, the people around you can see that, I think you end up in a pretty good place usually from a career development point of view. Like, I hadn't really turned around to look at where I'd been until probably the senior brand role with Pedigree, which was sort of I think every marketer in the early stages of the career just gets one job that sort of makes the difference. And for me, that was Pedigree. I think one of the biggest pet food brands in Australia, definitely top couple in the world. Very well invested in, very important piece of the Mars puzzle. I think even increasingly so now with emerging markets. But I was just really fortunate. I worked on some really cool activities. We got parts of the portfolio back into some solid growth, and then the magical comms campaign that comes along that really sort of puts you and the team in lights. And for me, that's a Pedigree adoption drive in 2009. I picked up some work that the guys had done in the previous years, and we took it to the next stage and won a few awards. And then, good awards too, not just, the ones that they just make up on the weekends. There's some Effie nominations and Spikes Awards in Asia and a few other bits and pieces. And then I think this is probably the moment where I'd sort of landed a bit and said, what do I do next? I was, senior brand, and was having that itchy feet moment again, which probably the previous years where I decided to run off to Canada. And I got a job with one of the big fast service restaurant companies. I won't say who because I probably didn't end up there anyway. But I sort of snagged the role externally. I was going to move to Sydney, and I had a really good general manager at the time who said, I can understand why you're doing what you're doing, and but we're about to set up a regional team, like an Asia Pac team in marketing for Mars Pet Care, and I reckon getting some experiences in emerging markets and in markets that are very different to your own is much better than going to foot burgers, for lack of a better phrase. And that's how the regional job came about. So, look, Zach, there's not a perfect playbook for how your career will unfold around you. I just think make sure the organisations you're working for are, someone that you can align with. And if you buy into the purpose, that's a good thing too. Make sure you've got really good people around you, whether they be in your team or your leader, especially. Like, I'm a big fan of choosing the right boss to work with, someone that can stretch you and develop you. And then I think just try and do a really good job, and the rest will sort of unfold around you is usually the way, and in a way that people like working with you and can see you doing big things in the future. So that would be the career model up until I started the Asia Pac journey. Yeah,
I think you make a really good point about a large chunk of it is who you work with, because I work at the Aaron Bass Institute, obviously, and I work with some phenomenal people. Like, I get to speak to Byron, especially now because he's not traveling as much. I get to speak to him quite often. And, across the hall from me is Professor John Dawes, and I get to pick his brain. I can just knock on his door and pick his brain. But it's also that same thing. Like, if I'm choosing some of the younger people to work with me on research projects, Obviously you want them to be highly intelligent and motivated and stuff like that. But part of it is, well, do I actually want to work with this person? And will they make the job funner? And if two people have very similar characteristics in terms of how they are, then it's who's also going to motivate me and how can I motivate them type of thing. Does that make sense?
Definitely does.
Yeah.
You want to choose, like, it's not, you don't want to get into a group think situation, but you want to find that spark. It's either in the team dynamic itself, with the leader, with the organisation, because I find if you're going through the motions a bit, it's challenging to really find the best version of yourself. And it's not necessarily to be the best human being you can be. I mean, that's part of it too. But I think if you're in an environment where you're on the razor's edge a little bit, you're close to the edge of your comfort zone, or you're just outside of your comfort zone, you'll find things out about yourself and find ideas within yourself that weren't necessarily evident before. So, I really buy into that. I think a lot of people get sucked in, and this is what I mean by the bright lights, the title, the salary, the company prestige, but look closer and go, who are the people I'm going to be working with? Do your homework there, talk to people in R&D, talk to people in sales, like find out, are they the sort of people that you can see yourself learning and developing from, but also creating a bit of magic together. So they're probably lessons that an older version of me would have appreciated in the earlier, or appreciates now, but the younger version would have appreciated more back in the day. But it's a lot of time at work, Zac, as you well know.
Yeah, a lot.
You want to make sure that the people you're doing it with are, on the same path.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I extend that sort of stuff actually into like my personal life. Whenever I've bought properties, I've spent quite a lot of time where the address is, and I've knocked on the doors of all of my neighbours and said, like, what is it actually like living here? What's the noise levels like? I had a property that was near the Adelaide airport, and so I asked my neighbours, do the flights keep you awake at night, or do you notice them that often? And yeah, they said you'll get used to it within a few weeks. And, or, there's a noisy kid across the road and their parents don't discipline them enough. But I think it's worthwhile investing in the same level of input for your job. Like, I sat down with maybe about 6 people before I started working here, just informal coffees, and said, what's it actually like working here?
Well, you will be living there. So you might as well do your work.
Exactly. And no one had any bad things to say. I mean, this place is highly competitive internally, but that's a good thing for someone like me, because it pushes me and it motivates me. So, if they said something like that, all the better. But that might scare off some other people.
Yeah, I think that there's an equal bit of like, you want to work with people that have similar career ambitions to you, or have similar drive, but you've also got to work out the sort of people you want to work with that are going to complement your style as well. Because I'm a big fan of, this is not necessarily, it's sort of a similar conversation for today, but a growth mindset, not only for the work that you're doing, but for the people that you're with. So, if you've got someone that's going to challenge you to go, oh, is that the best version of you in that meeting just then? Or have you thought about, did you really hear what that person was saying in a constructive way? Or on the other side of it, it's like, getting the right kind of feedback when you need it as well. Like, I loved it when you said this, or when you behave like that. So I think you get a nice little picture then of, when I was talking before about the self-development, but you get the career sort of builds, and so does your own style and, what's important, leadership impact, all of those things.
Yeah, definitely. And flexibility seems to be a key in, if I didn't get a job at the Institute after my PhD, chances are I would have had to move out of South Australia as well. And that's something that you seem to have done at least twice.
Yes.
So the opportunities.
Yeah, I think this is what you probably want to try and match up here, what you want to do with your life and then how work sort of fits into it. Like, I think sometimes it's easy to go, oh, I'll move somewhere for the job, but I recognise, like, it's not rocket science sort of wanting to leave a smaller country area and living in a city. But it's part of the things that I wanted to do, and I wanted to see a bit more of the world. I travelled a bit in the lead up to sort of corporate life, but then it's the merging, where I can live somewhere that I want to live and I can see some of the things I want to see. So I think just being clear about you and what you want to do, and then how the career fits in, I think is the best path. When you compromise one or the other, that's when you get yourself into trouble, when you're living on the other side of the world and you don't really want to be there, or you end up doing a job in a place that you don't want to live in either, which is kind of probably just as challenging. So I think being clear about you first is, and then, where the career path might take you. I think the only bias you might have is, making sure that you're just pushing a little bit, because a little bit of discomfort is a good thing for growth, I think.
Yeah, definitely. You don't realise until you're like almost on the other side to be like, wow, I made huge leaps and bounds in that, where I wouldn't have if I just did like, the usual sort of stuff. So you moved to more of an Asia Pacific role, is that right?
Yeah. So because I had the big dogs as well, I've got 2 Great Danes. Well, they're not the same 2 that I had then, but we've always had a couple of Great Danes, and my fiance was living in Melbourne. It was probably more a Singapore sort of job, just because of the way that it was going to work from just a proximity to all the markets. Like Asia Pac's a big region, and sort of Singapore's in the middle of it, so it gives you a bit less travel time. But Mars were great at the time. They just said, look, you can live, you want to live. So I said, okay, I'll base myself out of Melbourne, which is sort of at the bottom end of Asia Pac, which is not the easiest way to do it. But I was, sort of zipping up and down. It's not too bad. I mean, it sounds glamorous at the time. This is another one of the bright lights and trinkets of corporate life. Be like, oh, flying business class and 5-star hotels. It gets pretty shitty after about 4 weeks. But I think it's awesome. Like, you just got into a routine. I'd sort of get on the plane on Sunday afternoons. I'd be in Singapore by sort of 9:30, get a pretty good night's sleep, and then sort of come home Friday nights or Saturday mornings on the overnighter. And to be really honest with you, because the work was so stimulating, and I'd sort of be home for a little bit and then away for a little bit, 4.5 years just disappeared, which is really easy to do when you're sort of engrossed in what you're trying to do. Like, literally, 1 week I could be on the street in Delhi, and you're trying to work out how to build a portfolio that's around key sort of currency denominations. Like, you might want to get a little bag of pet food for 50 cents because you can't launch a 20-kilo bag of dry food in India because there's just not the available cash. And then a week later, I could be in the Ginza in Tokyo, and talking to the guys there who turn over like 20,000 SKUs a year and a couple of range reviews in pet care. Like, it's just really opposite sides of the coin. So amazing experience. I mean, the cultures as well. Like, I probably thought I was quite fluent culturally before I got into the Asia Pac job, but soon worked out I was not. And I mean, the learning there, like, just different people's ways of living their lives and what's important to them was probably more enriching than the work itself, right? Cultural barriers are, well, they're not necessarily barriers, probably more just learning how people do things a bit differently. It's pretty easy when you're growing up in Australia and you see the world in a certain way, but that's not always the case. I think the values of good people are all the same, but how you do things. So I learned lots of little tidbits, and that's probably the start of the leadership journey, really, which was, it was a classic sort of influencing without authority job, or herding cats, as they would call it. The Mars universe is really built around the general managers of the markets, because they're empowered to do what they need to do to win. So my job is trying to find scale, right? So if 3 markets or 4 markets wanted to do the same thing, then you could get a bit more oomph behind it, because they didn't all have factories either, so you're trying to get them to sort of work together. But it was an amazing time, right? Like, I wouldn't have otherwise spent as much time in China as I did, as in Thailand as I did parts of Southeast Asia. I even got over to Russia a couple of times to learn about the Russian cat food market, which is just a juggernaut. They love cats in Russia.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So I went over there and learned about how they built the cat business. Like, these are incredible opportunities and afforded to me by a brilliant organisation, and I got a bit of sightseeing in as well. So, yeah. Anyone that gets an opportunity like that in their career, just to go, if it lines up personally for you, is it's an incredible experience, because you look at all the great leaders in FMCG, they've all had something like that in their lives where they've had to sort of pick up and go and drop themselves in a very unique market. And then I think for the ones that are at the top of the tree, if that's your aspiration, then they've dealt with a crisis in a foreign market with a foreign language too. Like, I think it might be the 4 presidents of P&G have all dealt with a currency crash, things like that, which you wouldn't necessarily get if you stay in Melbourne, Australia. And I mean, we're going through a bit of it now with COVID, right? I guess everyone's probably learning a bit about it, but amazing experiences. So look, it wasn't necessarily an overseas live, but I was, for probably 20, 24 weeks of the year, I was in another country.
Wow. Yeah. Did you want to keep just going on that? So there is obviously the perks. You have the business class flights and the 5-star hotels and the dinners that are on the company credit card and everything like that.
Yeah.
But there's some downsides to it as well, right? I know it's probably maybe. Do you want to put a bit of realism behind it for people who are? I used to be. I'm not that old. I turned 32 a few days ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. By the time this airs, it'll be months away. I think this would be like November, maybe December. And I used to, that was actually one of the things that I aspired to do, is to travel for work, because I didn't grow up in an affluent family, and I didn't leave South Australia till I was over 18. And I thought, if I could find a job that would help me travel for work, that'd be great. And I'm at that point where I'd love to, but if I was to start a family, I think the dynamics would be a little bit different, and I'd want to be here a little bit more. So did you want to run through maybe the we all know the pros of it. Did you want to run through maybe the realities? I don't want to label it as cons, but...
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. So it's a massively privileged position to be in, I think. So the important bit is trying to make sure that you bring a level of perspective to it. And I think the cons are, airports aren't great, right? Like, doesn't matter whether you're flying economy, picking people up, flying business first, whatever it is. You're still trekking through airports, often on your own time, because you've got to be there for the start of the working week. You can't just wake up Monday morning and sort of swan into Melbourne Airport at 10 a.m, get a day flight up there, albeit happens sometimes for visa approvals and the like. There's a lot of admin that goes with it as well. Like, you are constantly applying for visas, sitting in places, like the Chinese embassy trying to get stuff signed off. What are you doing here? All of those things. Depending on the countries you're visiting, even though you've got a business visa, they still look at you like you've got three heads and you're going to do something illegal in the country. So there's a bit of that goes with it. I think time zone's challenging as well. Like, I've learned probably in the last couple of years how important sleep is, and you sort of glaze over it a bit probably through your 20s and early 30s, but it's sort of, you don't get it back, and it's a really important part of what I classify now to be super important in my well-being day to day. So sleep is disrupted. Even 3 or 4 hours of time zone difference, even with a Thailand trip, can be really sort of impactful. So, and then the bad habits that go with it as well, right? Like, you just think, I'll have a few beers with dinner and that'll help me sleep better. And you learn in time that that's not the case. You're just probably sedated rather than sleeping better. And there's a loneliness that comes with it too. Like, for me, Zach, you'll know I'm quite extroverted and can sort of get energy from people wherever or whenever. But I'd imagine for people who like a bit of quiet time and downtime, it's connecting on when you want to connect with people is more challenging as well. There'll be language barriers, and most of the time in the evenings, whoever else you're traveling with, you're out for dinner with, and you just sort of get into this cycle. So if you're not the most disciplined person, it can sort of get to a point where, you feel a bit like a rock star. You're on the road, a lot of it looks glamorous, but the deterioration is probably happening a bit behind the scenes. So you end up in, things can be not great at home. That was, it wasn't necessarily where I'd landed, but it was more a choice of like, far out, what am I actually doing here? Am I married to an organisation, or am I better off being at home? So I think, it looks glamorous. You go and do it for a month, and it's nice to hear someone call your name on a plane and all of that. But after a while, I think I got to a stage where like Singapore Airlines was coming around at Christmas Eve to drop me off like a massive bottle of champagne to say thanks for the year. And when you get to that point, you're probably spending too much time on a plane. Now, if you were like single and happy to be away from home and live out of a suitcase and all of that stuff, you might think it's the most amazing life you could possibly lead. But my experience in 90% of cases is that it's like, oh, God, here it is again. Sunday rolls around. You don't sleep great on the Saturday night because you're going to get up and pack your bag. And the same taxi driver turns up at, 1 o'clock on a Sunday. And, it sounds like I'm whinging about it, but there is a pound of flesh that comes with international travel.
Yeah, I think that's really do appreciate the honesty, actually, because I think, you know, it is quite easy to get caught up in the glitz and glamour without realizing, and I do find the same thing, like, you know, 3-4 hours of time zone difference, you think it's nothing, but it does throw you off enough. Even going to places like New Zealand threw me off a little bit.
Massively.
Yeah.
The little time changes are the worst ones. Like, it's almost better to be on the other side of the world because you're like, okay, I'm just jet lagged.
Yeah.
But the 3 or 4 hours is just bad. Like, because you're waking up a bit earlier or going to bed a bit later. Like, it's just, and if it's only for a week or two at a time, you can you get into the swing of it, then you're back into another time zone again. It's like, anyway.
Yeah, I found the same thing as well. If you have like an early morning, say like a red-eye flight or something like that, the night before, I just can't sleep properly.
Going to miss your alarm. And
I panic. I set like 5 alarms, and then I wake up at 2 o'clock and then 3 o'clock and then 4 o'clock thinking that I'm like late. And
yeah. Oh, you travel so much. Like, you wake up in a hotel and don't know where you are. That's the worst. Like, and the horror stories you hear of people, like, I'm a pretty good sleeper. Like, I could sleep. I wouldn't have been able to do the job anyway, but sleeping on planes is something I can do without
no way.
chemical input. But a lot of people end up like on bad sleeping tablets, and it's sort of the dark side of international corporate travel. And a lot of people don't talk about it, but you know, I've seen some not so good things in the time that I did it. But I'd say, like, if you want to get out of it and have had a great experience, you've got to know when to stop. And then secondly, just an ultra level of discipline around how you travel, because if you sort of take all of the smorgasbord of things that are fun when you're traveling, it can end up in a not so good place.
Yeah, I think if I start doing it a bit more regularly when the world starts opening up more, I'm going to knock on the door of you would know Professor Magda Nanetsky-Till.
Yeah, I know the name.
Yeah, so she was the Mars professor before she became the industry growth professor, and she flew quite a lot, and she seems to be on the ball and switched on no matter what time zone she's in, and I think she must be very, very disciplined in terms of what she eats, because when I'm away, I'm much more likely to eat things that I wouldn't at home, and I don't exercise as much because I don't have access to the gym, and your sleep is all off. So I'm going to make sure I knock on her door and figure out how she's done it.
Some people are just better travelers than others, right? Like most things in life, but I think, like, we probably didn't understand a lot about the mental health that comes with it. I'm sure it's, like, I've been travelling now for nearly 6 years. Like, I've been out of a plane, and I wear it as a badge of honour, I must say. But I would think now that the programs around well-being in an environment where you're jumping around time zones and continents and in and out of airports has improved dramatically.
Yeah, I'm hoping, just in early 30s, I'm hoping in, our lifetime that we have, not a 24-hour plane flight to get to Europe, and that would be quite nice.
I've done some wacky ones, mate. Like, the worst, I think, was like a Singapore. There used to be a business class only flight from Singapore to New York. When it was like for a global marketing meeting, essentially. But it flies direct, so it's 18 hours. So you go through 2 sleep cycles.
God,
it's just like, it didn't last. I think the whole purpose of it wasn't for silly pet food marketers like myself. It was more for the global financial markets, and the Singapore and New York being different time zones. But literally, you used to connect a plane full of bankers from New York to Singapore, Singapore to New York, and I got on it a couple of times. But man, like, anything over sort of 12, 13, 14 hours is a very long time. I don't care whether you're flying first class, cattle, whatever it is it's almost surreal. Like, you just lose complete touch of reality. Now, some others will say, I could do that easily, but for me, it was like, wow, 2's enough.
Yeah, exactly. I got like super anxious the first time I flew to Europe, because I'm like, oh no, 24 hours on a plane. Like, you get your 2 hours in Dubai or whatever, but far out. Like, I just knew it was going to be hell, and it turned out to be hell. Yep. I had a middle seat in cattle class, so it wasn't fun.
No, you're climbing out all over people. I think, to be fair though, a lot of people just get so enshrined in it. Like, it's institutionalized in some way. Like, you just get used to getting up, packing your bag, get in a car, get to the airport, get on a plane, get in a car the other side, go to the hotel. Like, it's just, I can see why people do it for so long. But I would just caution anyone who's entering that just to make sure you're really clear about why you're doing it. Make sure you understand the impact on yourself as you're going along, because it can sort of creep up on you all of a sudden. Then you're like, wow, where am I?
Yeah.
Not
So you touched on the cultural side of things as well. So you dealt with all sorts. You dealt with the Indian market, Russia, Thailand, Japan, all very different places.
China.
And China as well.
Yeah.
How different is it working in each of these cultures? What's the same and what's different? And you know, is it are some of the, I don't know, international marketing sort of courses are a little bit, I don't know, cliche, like holding your business card with two hands, and how much of that is textbook, and then what's the actual real reality behind working in different countries?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think I sort of learnt this as I went. I was probably lucky at the start of the cultural nuances of different markets. I had a really great mentor that was in the marketing team with me who'd been involved in, he was an Aussie, but had been involved in lots of these markets. And so it was sort of like, here's the cultural 101 you need to understand. And there are some things that you just need to be really aware of. You'll get away with it maybe once or twice as someone who's new, but if you do make the effort to do these things well, like the general two hands thing in Asia is, you know, reading the card, read it front and back, and you know, you don't just put it in your side pocket if you've got a top pocket, or you might put it in the little your journal or whatever you have with you. I think generally I would say good people around the world have a very similar value set. It's just more about where the lines are, I would say. So you can have great banter with any number of people in our amazing Asia-Pac region, but there is just different ways of engaging. So an example might be in Japan, and I found this actually in a couple of the other markets as well, but there's a get to know you, create value phase before you start really talking about the business itself.
Okay.
Japan would be a good example of that. I made a few sort of missteps in the early journey, and I was one of those wake-up moments in my career where I was like, geez, I really need to get my head out of my backside here and make sure that I'm aware of what's going on. But particularly if you're flying in and flying out, like if you think about it yourself, like it's like someone coming into the Institute in South Australia and sort of spending a week with you and then disappearing again, but is there with an agenda, you know, to try and push the organisation forward, whether it be in the best interest of the local market or not. So creating value is really important. So one is getting to know the people and building a level of trust. I think particularly in more conservative markets like Japan and China too, as a foreigner, you need to understand the business, understand the people, and then show them that you can build or help them build something. And then in other markets, I used to love going to India because it's a real sales game in India. Like I spent most of my time with the sales team when I was there, because you'd sort of learn how they would speak to retailers and, you know, the type of programs that work and those things. So it's easy as a marketer to get closer to some of that stuff. Okay. But what I would generally understand is I think the perspective it builds about how things can be done in this world, you know, just because you've done it well in Australia doesn't mean it works everywhere else. So it doesn't mean that it changes your style per se. It just allows you to have a lot of empathy for how things might be done in different places, and that there's not just one way to do things really well. Then as a marketer, I think there's lots of really cool nuances. I don't think the idea of building mental availability and physical availability changes, but there's some big decisions you need to make. You know, like media in China might be 8 times more expensive than it is in Australia. And so if you get the buyer wrong or the copy's not working well, like there's some big financial ramifications for it. I also think, you know, back to the Indian selling example, you know, you might spend more time in the early days when the business is scaling and you're trying to build distribution about how you can help the sales team articulate what the brand's about and the products, and, you know, sort of old-fashioned brochure selling in a lot of ways. But, you know, how do you do that really well? So I think, you know, all the elements of the mix are there. It's just in a different frame of reference than what the Australian market or a big developed market like in the Western world might look like. And then I think, you know, in Japan's another fascinating one where it doesn't seem anyone has more than 10 share, whether it be brands, retailers or whatever. So it's a very fragmented market. So then this sort of bespoke planning that you've got to try and do to, if you're trying to win in retailer A and, you know, making whiskers bigger in that particular customer, then how do you help them do that rather than just the consumer view? So look, they're all, I could talk for hours about how it's all quite different, but then you'd have other examples where you might go, actually, we've got some real similarities. So say a market, not from a cultural standpoint, but the stage of market. So like Korea and Taiwan might be quite similar in a particular segment in dog food. So then how do you sort of get them to understand that we have the same challenge, albeit very different countries, but how do you get them to work together to sort of come up with a solution that might be big enough to invest in? Because it's the massive paradox in Asia Pac, right? Like there is so much diversity. There's some massive scale markets and then there's some really small markets, but they're all kind of important. So how do you kind of get it to work in some sort of motion that's not massively fragmented and resource spread for the organisation?
Definitely. Do you have any stories about, I don't know, maybe putting your foot in it, or a campaign that you thought would work in a foreign country that just hasn't?
Yeah, so I've got one that I was involved in directly and one that I wasn't involved in. So it's always nice to spread about. But my first experience in Japan wasn't great. I was bloody lucky because Dad had sort of worked in Japan a bit, and so some of the guys that were still there, because the tenureship of a Japanese businessman is usually quite long. Like they stay at organisations for a very long time. Have lots of very fond experiences in Japan, but the loyalty that they have to employers is something to behold. But I had just come out of the Australian business. I thought I was probably God's gift to marketing, and a few that were smarter than me knew that I wasn't. But just the approach that I would take, I was just like you can imagine a pig-headed Australian coming in and trying to tell the Japanese business what to do, and then sort of firing off emails when I got home, trying to round up all the actions. And basically the CFO, who's an amazing gentleman, but he cared about my dad enough to basically have a word to me and said, if you do that again, you're not welcome back here. That was a sobering moment I spoke about before, but I was sort of far out, there is a big wide world out here, and I'm going to have to learn to bring a different style to the table depending on the people that I'm working with. It was one of the great ones, though, the Japanese relationship, because it ended up being one of the best ones because I had people around that cared and they sort of showed me the way. And then I think when I left, even today I still get the odd email from one of them saying, XYZ's leaving, can you do a little thank you? And I'm like, this is 5 years after, and I haven't seen them all for 5 years, but amazing experience in the end. They taught me a lot, Japanese people. They're very respectful. They like to do things at a very high level, sometimes not as fast as what I'd be used to, but they do it in a more methodical approach. And I think for a marketer, slowing down in your haste sometimes is or fools rush in is a good lesson to learn. And, they're just, as I said, there's lots of retailers, lots of competitors. It's not like, the Coles and Woolies sort of duopoly that we have today.
Yeah.
Everyone's got 10 shares, so it's a very even playing field. So the good organisations are very good because they can do it with a large customer base and they can repeat it year after year. And then there's plenty of examples in the Mars world where I remember a funny one with Snickers and Betty White. Remember the first spot was "You're not you when you're hungry." You're playing like a girl today, and I think they tried to run that out in Korea. And violence towards elderly people is probably, as for some people they can see the funny side of it probably because it's not literal, but in a market that doesn't necessarily, you're trying to run a Western spot in a Korean market, I don't think it went down particularly well. So the nuances of understanding cultural differences is super important, not only for just flat out respect and being able to work with people, but for business effectiveness as well. You can't just make ads in the US and expect to run them everywhere and for the same sort of results to come out. So it's interesting.
That's incredible. I loved that Betty White ad, and it was quite popular in Australia as far as I remember.
Yeah.
And so they thought, it's great, it's popular in Australia, and I'm assuming other different countries as well, like probably the US where Betty White's from. And it didn't work in Korea. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it probably does in hindsight.
Only in hindsight, though.
No, that's usually the way. But we also, I mean, there's tension within the region as well, so you've got to be careful about, languages is on packaging and all of those things are live things to consider. So it's just, I would say the number one lesson out of it is my vision was probably, sort of here when I started. And by the time I'd sort of got out of the region, it was sort of like far out. There's a very big world, lots of different ways of doing things, and sort of helped me build a very different view on what leadership impact was all about.
Yeah. I think it's that actually really ties in really, really well with what you were saying earlier about how, when you're out of that comfort zone, you develop the most, and, you working in so many different countries and almost putting your foot in that example that you gave might have
massively
really moved you forward. Yeah. But that moved you forward so much as a result. So it's kind of like that, I don't know, one door closes, I suppose, but not really. I don't know the saying I'm trying to think of there.
Yeah.
So one question I do have for you, and just to sort of clear it up for me and then everyone else at home. So assistant brand manager, senior brand manager, and then I guess dog brands portfolio manager. How do each of those roles, what does each of those roles involve? And then how do they differ from each other? Just so then people understand, if I'm a 18-year-old at a marketing or at a university studying marketing, what can I think that my career will look like?
Yeah. It's funny, I've just been talking about this recently in another context, but cool. I would say there's 3 bits to it, like I would say from a marketing career point of view. The first one is just as you go through the gears of bigger jobs, the first bucket is marketing capability, and you just get better at the stuff that you're doing. So at an assistant brand manager level, there's probably more of the doing, and then as you get more experience and you've got more capability, there's more of the thinking that goes with it as well. So executing someone else's plans versus devising your own.
Okay.
So marketing capability is number 1. I'd say number 2, and this sort of sits in the influencing part, but I think I had a great CFO in the Australian business years and years ago who shall remain nameless. He would know who, if he's listening, who I'm talking about. But he always said to me, brand managers are nothing without their P&Ls. So this one is an interesting one too, but influencing the commercial outcome of the organisation as you go through those career progressions, you've just got to get better at. So at an assistant brand manager level, it might be just, help running a project team for launching a new product that fills a partition gap, as an example, versus from senior brand and beyond, you're really trying to shape the revenue and margin agenda of the category you might be working in. And you're not just doing it for yourself, you're trying to do it across a cross-functional group, whether it be a sales team or an R&D team, supply chain, or even externally with retailers. I think marketers forget sometimes that your job's not to market internally. You've got to build a growth agenda that people can really buy into, and it doesn't matter whether it's internally, cross-functionally, or whether it's an external bit. So that would be number 2. So that's influence the commercial agenda. And number 3 is just leadership of self and a team. So at assistant brand manager level, you're fresh out of marketing, studying probably, and then you're sort of trying to find your way in the world a little bit. But then as you go through the gears again, you've got to find ways to really bring that to life through people, because you'll run out of bandwidth really quickly if you're trying to do it all yourself. There's that old adage, nothing's done well unless you do it yourself. It's actually the antichrist, I would say, in organisations where you have lots of people around you, and your ability to be successful will be largely dependent on, can you get the best out of the people around you? And there's a whole journey of self-development that comes with that. I think trying to absolve your ego and trying to probably just creating space for people to find their best. Like, I think your early leadership approaches are to, just keep encouraging people, tell them they're really good. Whereas I've discovered that if you create the space for people to find out they're great themselves, that's a much more sustainable and sort of long-term outcome for people, both personally and professionally. So they're probably the 3 buckets. On the capability front, I mean, I've been really fortunate to, and obviously why we're talking today, the Mars journey on Ehrenberg Bass was sort of 06, 07 it started. And, I still remember the first time I was introduced to Byron's theories, and by Byron himself. The commercial agenda bit, I reckon, is just experience over time. Like, you just realise that the P&L is, marketers are in the business of growth. Anyone else that says they're not, or they're in the business of other things as well, is just kidding themselves. Like, we've got to get the top line of the P&L going along with the bottom line, but top line is a really important thing. You don't want to sell things for nothing, because there's no point doing that. But I think if you can find growth and then find it profitably is the way to do it. And then the leadership stuff is good people, but making, around you to help, but really looking at yourself in the mirror is super important. Otherwise, you'll never find that true, authentic version of yourself that people want to work with or follow, or that you can lead. So they're probably the three. I would say that if an 18-year-old was looking to get into marketing, I'd say capability, commercial influence, leadership. You get those three right in increasing levels, you will do well.
Awesome. I think you wrapped that up super well. Yeah, I'm glad you had spoken about that previously, because it seemed like you had an awesome answer ready. So
you just asked the right question at the right time.
Lucky me. You moved from Mars after becoming the brand director for Whiskers and everything like that. So you ended up moving to Lion, where you've been the marketing director for 3 different areas, actually. So milk and culinary, juice and water and ice, and drinks and snacks. I suppose 2 questions is, how does it move from then being, I will just start with, like, how's it moving from one leadership at one organization to another? Because, different cultures within them, different people, they don't know you. You haven't grown organically from there. You're kind of like an external hire. Did you want to run us through that a little bit? And then I'll ask you the next question.
Yeah. So I think my reflections on change are really good. Like, I think about now where I am versus if I had stayed at Mars over that sort of period of time, and the experiences and the skills I've got are very different now versus what I would have had if I had stayed at Mars. So I reckon there's an important lesson in some companies are really good at building the diverse career experiences that you need to sort of round out the 3 things I was talking about before. Yeah. But and they're very clever at it, right? They can create an allure of 20 years of diverse experiences, whether it be living somewhere or doing different jobs. But there is something to be said. A good mentor of mine challenges me on this a bit, to go, where is the actual growth going to be for you? And sometimes a very different environment, or a lot of the time a very different environment, whether it be category, business, geography, is always the best answer. So, look, it wasn't easy in the first 12 months. You get enshrined a little bit, and particularly because of my background with the Mars organisation, it wasn't necessarily, I probably underappreciated how different it is. I think going from an organisation that is massive, but in a certain market might only be 2 or 3% of the supermarket sales, into a big organisation like Lion that might have market leadership in different areas of the supermarket that are much bigger. So the demands are significantly higher. And I think there is something to be said in FMCG between being in regional or global roles where you're influencing a lot versus being in an operational job which is in a market. So they're very different in terms of the speed and the demands and all of that. So I would say they're probably the big ones that changed for me. I think also being home was just nice too. Like, I remember after 12 months, I said to a few of the Mars colleagues, I could never work so hard, because you spend a lot of time travelling and talking when you're in global and regional jobs. But when you're in market jobs, you spend a lot of time doing, right? Like, there's just the intensity of the face-to-face environment is different. But I don't regret for a moment jumping over, albeit, after a little while you're like, geez, probably was a bit better at Mars. It probably took me 2 years, to be fair, Zach, about feeling like I was more part of the furniture in the current employer than I was in the last one. Yeah. They talk about Martians all the time, and there's a reason for it, because it's, an organisation that you really buy into with private ownership, and depending on what categories you're working in, but you've got great brands and well-funded, and the people are good, and the career opportunities are immense. But then coming over, like, it's hard to imagine what, 2020 Mars would feel like versus, where I am today. So the advice would be, if it feels right and you're sort of at a point where it's time for change, it's a really good thing to do, because you will be a better manager at the back of it.
Yeah. So where do you go to from here in terms of your career progression? What's on the horizon? And what should be the end goal for someone who wants to climb the industry ladder?
Yeah, I think there's two paths in all of this, and the industry ladder thing I sort of buy a bit because there's people like the prestige of title and income and all of those things, but I reckon you just got to get back to what really makes you tick, because otherwise, like I've seen lots of people take the big pay increase in the title and then go, actually I don't like doing a lot of this stuff. So spending the time while you're developing, thinking about the things that really get you out of bed and going in the morning. And then, so that's number one. Like, what sort of job do I want? What sort of work do I want to be doing? Who want to be doing it with? What industries I want to be in? Like, do all that stuff first, because the income will come as a result of the passion and energy that flies from sort of living in alignment. Then I think at a marketing level, and Mars probably enshrined this in me, you kind of got to decide, is it functional expertise to the end of the road, which is like, I'm going to get the best marketing job I can possibly get because it fulfills me personally and that's what I want to do from a career point of view. So, do you want to go and be a CMO of a big FMCG organisation? Or do you want to take your talents and couple them with some general management experience, which is like, I bring a functional expertise to the table from a leadership perspective, but I'm really keen to get my skills up in other parts of the organisation, where we're making decisions on what capital to spend for supply chain or how we structure the sales team best to get after the distribution objectives that we have. So for me, general management's where I'd like to head, and I'm sort of making, I would say, trying to get the right experiences that give me that opportunity. It doesn't, I'm forever a marketer, right? Because I think, there's lots of different people can run organisations, but there's a lot of marketing and sales people running food businesses. And then you just, I find that people is the thing, and solving problems with people are the things that really get me sort of up and about. So then general management feels like the most broad way to do that. So transitioning is not easy either. I mean, some people don't make the jump. They sort of say, oh, well, I tried it and wasn't good enough at it. But I think that for me is where I'd like to head.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome way to go. So, yeah, I didn't realize at that point you could make the two diversions. Like I knew about the CMO role, but I didn't quite understand at that level you sort of have that pivot that you could go into GM and, yeah, that
you
makes
typically
a lot of sense.
need an organisation to back you, but I think, as I said, growth-orientated people are usually at the helm of businesses. I mean, there's lots of other skills that come with it as well, people management and financial acumen and, team impact, all of those things, right? But I would say it's a pretty common path. Like at Mars, they've got a GM school, which is literally for people who are transitioning out of like a senior functional role into more general management. So,
Wow.
It's an exciting path to take.
Yeah, yeah. Throughout this conversation, you've mentioned a couple of times about the role that mentors have played in your life and the advice that they've given you, especially about getting out of your comfort zone and stuff like that. I mean, you don't have to name names. That's not necessarily the important part. It's more about what influence have they had and your advice about people getting the most from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be anywhere in life, I don't think, without mentors. And they started at a really early age, right? Like it's easy to call them mentors in hindsight, but you have people that guide you, essentially, that have either conceived the world in front of you better than you can, or they've been around the block a few more times than you have. So I can think of lots of people, both personally and professionally, that have guided me along. I think that's a massively undervalued part of working in large organisations. I have been very fortunate to have different ones, like it doesn't necessarily need to be the most senior person. It can be just someone who's complements some of the things that you might be trying to do with your life as well. So then in terms of mentors, I would say you're using them to help you build perspective. It should be a mutual relationship, but perspective is important. And I say perspective over opinion or what's right and wrong, because sometimes a mentor might say something that they believe builds your perspective, but might not be the right answer for you. So I can think of some examples where that's happened. But what I generally try and do is find people who are passionate about self-development, and they've got this sort of like, if they've been up the elevator, they know how to send it back down to get the next person. So find people that are really passionate about it, and then make sure that you're the one that's driving the outcome. So I've generally found in business that if you really say to someone, look, they can feel the authenticity coming through about what you're after, and you drive it, there's no hindrance on how much time you could get with that person. So I think it's just showing up in that really authentic way in the first instance, and then making sure, obviously, that you find someone that's got a similar sort of passion around the areas that you might be trying to get some mentorship in. And then lucky last is once you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you might have some experiences that might help others, you've really got to make sure that you push that back as well, because that's how the whole circle sort of works.
Yeah, you sort of really segued me really into what I was going to touch on next, which is, having moved up the chain yourself and mentoring those below you. So you're obviously at a leadership level. How do you see your role as a mentor, and how do you try to mentor those below you?
Yeah, I've got a pretty simple philosophy on this. I'm very people-centric. So not to sound like an idiot, but I think if you start with people's best, well, your intention is to get them to the best possible place that they can be, then I reckon that's a really powerful way to do it. And the reason I say that is just like, forget all the crap that goes with it. It's just authentically, do you really want to try and help people succeed in life? And often for me, it's not just a work thing. It's, you'd find if you're working on with trying to be a better human being, it'll naturally cascade into being a better person at work as well. So that's probably the first tenet that I really get involved in. And I think you've got to find an angle for you if you're going to be a mentor. Like, what are you going to offer people? So the things I try and talk a little bit about is my own experiences, because I think it's easy for people to connect. So storytelling is important. And then what are you mentoring on? So I've been really fortunate in the last couple of years to do a lot of work with a certain individual who is a mindset performance coach, which is really centered on, understanding firstly how your brain and your anatomy works depending on the stimulus in your environment, and then building some presence of mind when certain things happen so that you can stay in the right-hand side of your brain rather than the left. The left is fight or flight. It's naturally how we've been programmed as human beings to, seek stimulus and avoid danger. But helping your brain, because it's a very reptilian system, our brain. Although we like to think we're the most developed people on the earth, we are far from it. I think, our brains were designed to, get us away from saber-toothed tigers. But if we're not educated in how it can manifest in the modern day, a phone bill could be a saber-toothed tiger if you're not careful. And the stress reaction response that comes with it, you're just not going to find your best when you need to. So how I sort of approach the mentoring bit is like, okay, how do we help you find the best version of you? How do you find the execution that you need in the moments that matter? And then we spend a lot of time sort of back and forth on that. But there's a whole raft that goes with the mentoring bit. I think you got to be clear on the purpose that you're embarking on together. I think you've got to be sort of fostering the connections that would happen between you and that person. And it sort of manifests in itself as trust predominantly, but building strong connection, authentic connection is important. And then I think, I'm going to coin a phrase from my coach, but accountability to each other is really important too, which is like, did you do what you say you were going to do? How do you keep each other on track? All of those kind of things. When you're on it's just change, right? So when you're changing things about you, you've got to be really make sure you've got someone there to help you along the way. So that's what, it's a long-winded answer into what I find mentoring to be and how I can best help. That's and I'm still cultivating it, right? I'm still learning a lot myself. I'm, you don't stop. I think there's different things that happen along the way that some you anticipate and some you don't. So how do you sort of build that all in?
Yeah. Is one of the people that you may have mentored Jackie Ruth? Yeah, who's
Jackie
now
Roth, yeah.
Roth. Oh, it's Roth. Is I mispronounced it.
That's okay.
My apologies, Jackie.
She won't mind.
Who will hopefully be on the podcast soon. So she's now at Big as a marketing manager for Spreads.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, kicking goals all over the place. Was nominated for B&T's 30 under 30, which is super impressive, and just seems to be, just doing really, really well.
She's a very pure human being, but I mean, her success is on her, really. She's putting in the time. She's really clear. She says out loud, the things that she wants for herself in terms of who she wants to be. And then she spends a lot of time getting into the energy space of what that might manifest or visualising what it might look like. So when you put those three things together, I mean, you can accomplish anything really. So I think Jackie's growth is her. I've just been fortunate enough to be shepherding at this stage of the game, but there's a saying of when the student is ready, the teacher will come, and I've experienced it, and I think Jack, I'm not the only teacher, obviously, she's had some other influences too, but it's a testament to what happens when you do the work, I would say, on yourself. Yeah,
she strikes me as one of those real authentic people that you're talking about, which is actually one of the reasons I quite enjoyed working on the research project with your team originally for Lion was, you guys were, not only were you across a lot of the basic material, but I could tell right from the original TC that we had, you were real authentic people. I'm like, this is going to be a great project. I've had a bit of a nightmare project recently.
It's not much fun.
Won't go into that one.
You don't want to spend energy wearing masks that aren't you. That's how I see the world. Like if you put your own on and then, spend all your time trying to work that out rather than trying to put someone else's on. So it sounds easy. It's not easy to do because, there's so much in the world now that says that you need to be three different people at once, but I don't buy into it too much.
No, I think try to consistently be me, and I think the world seems to work that way.
Yeah.
So I'm obviously a big advocate of how brands grow and the books from the Institute. Is there any marketing books that you would recommend anyone else read? Something that's worthwhile? Yeah,
it's interesting. I think there's some awesome business books that I've really enjoyed. So How Brands Grow 1 and 2. I'm not just saying it because I'm on your podcast, but they follow me around a bit. I think when in doubt or when you sort of lose your way a bit, it can sort of flick the light back on about, empirically what works over a long period of time. Now, to get the bits, to invest in copy that works is a simple thing to say, but not an easy thing to do. So I try and just couple it with books that I really enjoy reading. So a couple of books I've read recently I really like, it's a brand building masterpiece, is Every Bastard Says No, which is about 42 Below vodka and how that started and ended up being listed and then sold to Bacardi for not an insignificant amount of money. I'm a big fan of trying to read as much about culture and people as I can. So there's a couple of great books. Why Should I Be Led by You? There's another book called Dream Teams. I'll think of who it was by in a minute. And there's another book called The Culture Code, which I spent a bit of time reading as well. The American Icon, the story of the Ford turnaround. When Alan Mullally was running the show, and it's more like a novel than a business book per se, but it is a fascinating lesson in business, and getting that right. What else have I read recently? I read the Brewdog business book, Brewdog, the craft beer from Scotland. Business for Punks, it's called, in true archetypal fashion. Everything they do is punk in that business, and their finance guide and business guides are exactly the same. In and Out Burger, there's a great book about them, which I've read recently as well. I mean, these are, it's easy to probably retrofit the marketing laws, but far out. It's amazing. It's actually frightening how systematic it is, albeit it just turns up in different ways in these books. You can ask me a question.
Yeah. I reckon what I'll do is, because what I often do is then go ahead and purchase these books on Amazon or whatever, and they eventually arrive and have a look through. So these brands have grown, and you think through applying the marketing laws.
Yeah, so I would say In and Out story they identified an archetype, like it was a Californian sort of story, but they really got into that sort of custom grease culture, custom cars and hot rodders. So the experience of participating in that in a burger place. But I think the In and Out story, the one that actually I love the most, is consistency. They knew about their assets in the early days, whether it be the product, the way that the stores were laid out, how the logo showed up on the store, what the staff were like, the tomato tastes the same all the time. It's just phenomenal. And, there's lots of other stories of big fast food chains growing around them, but In and Out did it in a really distinctive way. It wasn't necessarily different. I mean, the burgers are all the same largely. People who are In and Out fans would say there's no better burger than an In and Out burger, but far out, a lesson in consistency is incredible. I think Ford was fascinating from a different angle in that it was a very scattergun organisation, and then how it's got back to a simple operating model, albeit it's a massively complex business. There's millions of parts in cars, so there's nothing simple about it. But an interesting lesson in getting back to the big partitions, focusing on your core. They're really good at making small cars and large trucks, essentially. How do they do that really well and maximise the penetration opportunities in there, rather than trying to launch an SUV every 5 minutes and then a race car and then all these other things? So I think there's some interesting lessons, and I could hear Byron probably waxing lyrical about how it might work. And I think the business for punks is really interesting around the importance of building brand to create value, protect price, and creating a margin to invest, which is a lot of brewers and craft booze mobs will be out there saying, let's just get the growth and don't worry about the margin, where I think it's important as a sustainable model in the long term. Like Mars, we always would talk about, you've got to keep your margin heading in the right direction, otherwise you don't have the freedom to invest in great advertising and other brand building activities. So I have a few others and maybe I can email you afterwards, but I'll try and get into the books that aren't very dry. They're more about, they're telling you a story about what's going on. And then, the whole Ford book was literally in the GFC, right? So as everyone crashed around them and asked for government handouts, how were they going to get through? And then there's the added complexity of the legacy of the Ford name. The family are still large shareholders in the business. It's a rubber ducky story as well, that, you're not just running a car company, you're running a family legacy that'll go on for hundreds of years. So I think there's some really interesting learnings. And then there's a few other books of Eat Your Greens. You probably...
Yeah. On my bookshelf.
Shout
out to Rima.
It's somewhere too. I was just looking for it before. And then the last set of books that I'll email you is just more around this, if anyone's got some interest around the personal development space and finding your mindset. I think there's a couple of really interesting reads that I could share as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be really useful because, you shouldn't just be looking to build your brand. You should be looking to build yourself at the same time.
Well, you won't be any good at building your brand long term if your personal growth doesn't match. So I think they're really central.
Definitely. I think we'd be a bit neglectful to not talk about how COVID-19's affected, consumer goods categories as a whole. There's no need to discuss specifically the Lion brands by any means, but how do you think it's affected, people being essentially they couldn't leave? Is more sales moving online? Are pack sizes changing? Are they buying bigger pack sizes or smaller pack sizes? Are people more price sensitive? I'm not sure. How's COVID sort of affected consumer good categories?
You've listed all the ones that are probably observed. So first of all, I think people have got less time. So recognisable brands, and I'm not saying specifically to the categories I work in, but I think it's happened as a pretty obvious outcome out of this. So there's probably the lessons that there's less browse time, whether it be online or in store, and probably less trips too, which means that you the available time to do things in store, albeit, category browsing times are often well below a minute.
Yeah.
You sort of go into the things I would say.
Yeah.
There's definitely an in-home consumption bit that goes with it as well. So larger pack sizes are winning.
Okay.
They might not be in store as often.
Yeah, and if they're not going into their workplace, because you like yoga and stuff like that.
Kids going to school as well.
Yeah, kids not going to school, so you can buy the bigger tub rather than the little ones to chuck in their lunchbox.
There's a bit of that goes on.
Yeah.
Online's been fairly well publicised as a big growth area. I think it's been the tonic that the online market needed, which is, I think inherently people don't mind going shopping. There's something about that. I mean, the grocery shop's a bit of a mundane task, and that's why you see the behaviours that you see. But I think online sort of brought down some of the barriers because it was sort of a forced behaviour, particularly if you were concerned about sort of going in store and mixing it with the other sectorians that we have here. I would also say that it's changed the advertising landscape a bit. A lot of companies have been drawing back, trying to protect cash positions and manage P&Ls and all of that stuff. And it's been well publicised in the advertising industry that revenues are down significantly. But then there's been some other brands that have really taken the opportunity to drive massive share of voice. It's probably not the greatest metric, I wouldn't say, but, they've been filling the void a bit, probably doubling down on advertising spend rather than retreating from it. So there's a good lesson in that. And then probably the last one is just it's sort of an inverted bell curve in some ways, but there is a higher propensity to treat yourself because life's a bit harder.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, there's a increasing awareness around health, and it might manifest in the way of immunity or weight management, all those kind of things. But people feel like, there's a few more cheat days than there probably would have been historically. Yeah. But on the other days, there's a bit more demand around, am I doing the best for myself? And probably comes from just taking better care while you're in a more challenging environment mentally. So they're probably some of the themes that I've noticed. I think talking to people in the industry, I don't think there's much different there.
Do you think that the move online will become a habit? Will say, I don't know, because online, what percentage would be online at the moment?
It's still sub 10.
Yeah,
I would say.
So it's increased, but do you think people will keep that as part of their habitual behaviour?
Yeah, I think so. There will be probably a correction once, or if we get back to normal. I think there's going to be a new normal. I mean, it's the most overused term there is at the moment.
Yep.
or pivot. We get a bit. I'm a bit guilty of that myself from time to time. But I think there will be a correction. There's no doubts about that. But what I should also say is that there has been the barriers have been dropped quite a bit. So for marketers, I think the implication is how do you make sure you're doing that environment well too. So it's not like, I might laugh about it and say I'm not a big fan of point of sale in store and, doing banner ads and the like is not that's sort of like point of sale in the digital world. But the reality is keyword search, as an example, is very, very important now in the online world because people can't be bothered browsing. They're just like, I want dog food. And the one that's at the top of the list, might not necessarily be the one that you buy, but I think the propensity, how you bring physical availability to life in the online world, there is some skill that goes with that. It doesn't mean you deprioritise other marketing efforts because 90% of the food that's bought is still going to be in a store. So you got to get in the diamond, get the right share of space, make sure you're well priced, cover off the key sort of segments. But it's an and, not a but, I would say, at the moment, which is there'll be a growing level of capability that will come. And I think, it's going to light the fuse for the Amazons and I think catch.com.au are doing a good job at the moment. These online retailers who are very good at that online world have just needed the fuse of food to be lit. So how do they do that? I think the ongoing challenge is going to be, like in this country, we've got not many people but big distances. So
yes,
how you get chilled delivery right and all of those things. But I think in some big other categories, like, I think the pet circle journey for pet food had started well before. I still like going to my local pet food store because they only own a couple of stores, and I feel like I'm buying from them, and they're usually pretty competitive on all the things that I might buy. But it will be here. I'm just not sure how big it's going to get in the short term, or even in the medium term. I think some people, it will probably just change the way that people buy some things. I'm happy to buy the household sort of pantry items or the standard ones. I might buy them online, but I might top up with a fresh food shop once a week or those kind of things. I think the other thing that's interesting, Zach, and we've certainly seen it, and I've probably noticed it in my own behaviour, a sample size of one, but proximity starts to matter a bit as well, or where you might go that there's less crowds. So I know a local store to me that's like a local deli, and it's an amazing shop, don't get me wrong, but it was sort of more of a chore to go there. But now it's like, all right, actually I might just get up a bit earlier in the morning, get in there before everyone else does, and then I can sort of get what I want and get out. Whereas, going to a big store is probably less attractive just because of the amount of people that are in there and all of that stuff. So I think a bit of channel shift might happen as well. And the last one will be, just the rising change in convenience that will come with this. So I would think that your big convenience retailers will be looking about how they capture this new world that we're all embarking on.
Yeah. So from a consumer goods manufacturing position, how often are you interacting with the retailers? How often are you in meetings with the Coles and Woolies about getting your products into store, and then how much, and then which shelf facings, and then at what price, and how do you advertise through them, and how much of your time's actually spent on that?
A lot.
Yeah.
So it's just the reality of how the retail market plays out in Australia. It's not like Japan, where you've got lots of retailers who are vying for a size of the prize. I think it's one of the big learnings coming back into the operational roles as well. I think really understanding what retailers want to do with certain categories, but just at a general supermarket level as well. So getting in tune with that, understanding how it drives the category forward, and then what portfolio choices you need to make and how you can sort of capture that opportunity is really important, I think. There's not a lot of upside, I don't think, in trying to drive your own agenda. I think everyone has a different role to play in terms of what perspective you might bring in terms of how it might all come together. But it's a really, I think you're going to have to get really good at it as well to make sure that you're going to have long-term success. But I think it's a good lesson for marketers. Like I reckon I probably started in my career sort of salespeople were the devil.
Okay.
You were constantly trying to, convince each other that one way or the other was the right path. I think the key for most organisations, but in FMCG, in my experience, working really closely with your sales colleagues is super important to getting the momentum that you need to grow the brands. So everyone wants brand growth at a manufacturer level, but if it doesn't fit into something bigger around how it sort of drives retail agenda or the category agenda, you're going to end in a not a great place, I would say. So having customer essentially at the heart of the things that you're trying to do is super important. So I prioritise time because I think that's where the rubber hits the road too, Zach, for lack of a better phrase. So, retailers are the gatekeepers of those growth plans. So you've got to make sure that it's you're trying to find some mutuality in all of it.
Yeah, and I suppose that leads me on to the next question, which is, do you sort of come at it from, we have this research that shows this is the way that we can grow our brand, and if we grow our brand, then the category should grow, and then that's better for you as well? Or how do you kind of use research within your organisation?
Yeah, so I think at a fundamental level, you want to understand how the category is bought in the first place. And my experience largely, and Aaron Burke-Bass, music to your ears, is most of the category value is tied up in people who come in not that often. So it's really easy to build things that you think for people who might buy a certain category every single week. But the reality is that a lot of people don't. They don't hold much knowledge about you. And they're going to make some repertoire style decisions when they're buying things. So I think the sweet spot often is understanding why a light buyer is a light buyer. It could just be simply that you're not investing enough in, or the category doesn't invest enough in advertising. It's not easy to find in store. The experience of shopping it in store isn't great. It's not priced in a way that I think it's that it works. But I remember an old, you'll know, a very famous Mars colleague used to describe it in 4 ways: the barriers to penetration. I don't think of it, I can't find it, it's not relevant to me, or I can't afford it. Mm. So that's kind of the light buyer domain for me, which is like, how do you tackle some of the big things that are going to constrict category growth in the long term? So working closely with research partners like yourselves, or you might do lots of other sort of work. There's lots of scan data too, as you would know, but trying to work out where those little bits of opportunity are. I think the challenge then is, where's the scale? I see a lot in the pet food industry now, like there's obviously grain-free's become a thing. So it was clearly, over time it's become a barrier to penetration that you don't have a grain-free product. So now everyone seems to have a grain-free product. I'm not sure if it works or not, but it's just an observation now as a consumer walking down the aisle. But there'll be ways in which there'll be commonality for retailers and manufacturers to grow, which is understand those light buyers. They're the ones that are, it's bloody hard to get people to buy more soap. There's only so much soap you can potentially use, but where they buy soap, what type of soap they buy, all of those things are really important things to understand those barriers. Some of them are easier to solve than others. Some are products, some are shelf related, some are advertising, as I mentioned, but spending most of my time in that space, because that's where there is an incremental opportunity for everybody. If a light buyer comes into a category, and you get heaps of them, it really changes the growth profile. Whereas if you're staying in this, in the heavies, which a lot of research has a bias for, to try and find people that are light buyers of a category is a challenging thing to do. You end up just cannibalising, stealing share, and you sort of get into this, task of one-upmanship versus the other players in a particular segment. So that would be the main place. And there's lots of ways to find out how light buyers might. There's lots of science to say that how they sort of work, but there's also category intricacies that you need to understand.
Yeah, definitely. So just building on what you were saying, so you're quite across a lot of the stuff that the Ehrenberg Bass Institute promotes, and the laws of basically marketing and how consumers behave. So you and your team are across that knowledge. Did you find any difficulties or any barriers about getting other parts of the organisation on board, perhaps the sales team or the accounting team or the management team or the people in R&D? And if so, how did you manage to bring them on board?
Yeah, I think just to build on your earlier point of a COVID reflection, is a lot of category growth that I've seen is from more light buyers coming in. So that's the evidence point to say that that's how the expandability happens and how brands can grow. So it's interesting how that's happened. I think people just buying more categories too when you're sort of locked up in a home environment. I think the biggest challenge within an organisation is to get people to think like a consumer. When you work in a FMCG branded goods business, it's hard because you're never a consumer again. You're some weird mutated sort of half manufacturing led, and it's easy to think, try and convince yourself that you want to think like a consumer. And the reality is it's just bloody hard. In some of the categories I work in, or have worked in, the purchase decision is 8 seconds. That's walking to the fixture, buying and getting out of there. You're not sitting there looking at every single label or the cat colours or all of that stuff or what it might be saying on the front of the pack. So I think firstly is you're not a consumer.
Yeah.
And helping people to understand what a consumer looks like. So I often find, videos are a really good thing. Even so, you could argue that people that come to research, I'm not a big fan of groups, but they're even a little bit sort of mutated as well. But if you just go into a store and watch people, like they're not doing all the things that you think a consumer is looking for, right? They're often, like I watched a lady, might have been in the deli the other day, but it was one of those open air delis, and it was quite cold, like close to the store, and she was literally like shopping from about 10 metres back and then saw what she wanted and just went bang in there, grabbed it and gone, like, you know, and there was a kid in the trolley and it was screaming, and I was like, far out, this is the consumer's life. So the first thing is go and have a look at how people do it. We did this thing a couple of years ago. It's one of the most insightful things I've ever done in FMCG, but it's called an accompanied shop, where you sort of get $150 budget, because most Australians are living on about $150 a week worth of groceries, like 40%. Okay. So I reckon the big retailers worked it out in the early piece. So you turn up the night before, you get a brief. It's an actual, you know, family somewhere, and then you turn up to a big supermarket or a big shopping centre, probably pre-COVID, and then you've got 45 minutes to do the family shop, but the brief's got all the information that you need, right? So what they like, what they don't like, you know, what you're shopping for, breakfast, lunches for the kids, dinners, all those things. It is, and it's like you got 45 minutes, right? Because that's meant to be reflective of what it's like, and it is so stressful, Zach. I can't tell you. Like, for someone that doesn't really pay attention to what I'm doing when I'm in a supermarket, you walk in there and first thing you realise, you see a lot of red and yellow tickets, right? Because you're like, far out, I'm going to buy 5 days worth of food. I've got $150. So you're flying around the supermarket. Like, first thing I did was like rang my mum straight away. It's the biggest cheat ever. She's like, buy mints because you can make tacos and you can do spaghetti bolognese and you can do all these things. And then you get upstairs, like after you sweated running around, like, and like things that you might find immaterial, but you go, far out, you spent 150, you're going to put some items back. And it's an embarrassing thing to do, like at the checkout. Then you get upstairs and then the family's there, and you've just bought their shopping for the week and they're critiquing you.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, wow. And then, you know, the story at the end of it's like, oh, you know, you give them the groceries, but then they might say, oh, geez, look, we had an accident in the car last week and I had to put 2 new tyres on the car and I wasn't quite sure how it was all going to sort of come together this week. So it's one of those perspective moments where you go, out, like there is, you know, and why value is so important is because it's a very different world. So then when you're in that pressure cooker environment, it's amazing how quickly you move. You know, you've got to get this thing done. You might have 10 of your colleagues in the store with you as well, and you see each other in the aisles. You're like, oh, got to go. Like, you're looking at the clock going, I've got to get back upstairs in like 45 minutes, otherwise this is going to be an epic failure. So that is another really cool way to sort of build perspective too. And then, I mean, we obviously do a bit with you guys, but just trying to take people on the curve of what it's actually like. You know, how many brands people are buying, how infrequently they're coming into the category. What are some of the things that really make the biggest difference? So the reason it's important is then you're focusing on the right activities from a marketing perspective, which is we need to invest in weeks on air in advertising. We need to make sure that the products are good, not too good, so that people can't afford them or that you don't make any money. Yeah. And then just know that you be privileged enough to get part of a repertoire rather than, you know, something that someone's going to buy every single week. Yeah. So I think it's they're probably the things that I would try and focus on. And then you're forever in case study mode, right? See, we did this happened. This is because this, and this. And they're like, oh, really? Oh, good. Do that again. And I'm like, oh, I'll try to. But I think they're the kind of bits and pieces that sort of culminate in an influence in an organisation that sort of takes you from you're not a consumer. That is the rule. You are not a consumer. You are a ambassador for a big food company that thinks that you're a consumer, and it's a bad spot to be. Yeah. I remember the old Mars CMO who I was referencing before, but, you know, he kind of did it in a way about hand washing theory when they used to try and, to get rid of illnesses, they used to try and drain people's blood. And then it basically worked out that if you wash your hands, you were going to vanquish 95% of the germs. But it was just a demonstration of what science does in terms of how it can change the way that people might view the world. So they're probably some of the things that I would do. But that, if you've never done that $150 shop and you're working with a sponsor of the Institute and they're a big food company, it's a really fascinating thing to do because it is like intense.
It sounds intense. And the fact that there's a family on the other end who's going to...
Oh, yeah. But you don't know that. So I'm probably telling you more than you should know, but I think it was a watershed moment for why prices and range and all that stuff really matter.
Yeah. So does all of this research kind of fit into, like, how much of your role, especially at like that, marketing director level, is spent on, not just the activities that we're doing today or the next week or the next month, but, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the track? Are you building these marketing plans? And does this research guide those plans? And I suppose what elements do you or what tools do you like using in them, and which ones don't you like using?
Yeah, so I understand the organisational need for long-term planning, but I think once you're outside an 18-month window, you're just guessing.
Yeah.
So you can, largely direct where things might go, but I think if you're planning with any kind of future in mind outside of 18 months, there's trends that will carry, but I think you're setting yourself up for failure. And within your 18-month plan too, you've got to have the ability to flex in it, because plans are nice, but when you've got competitors, it's just like the world can change like that, right? COVID is a really good example of organisations that demonstrate the most agility are probably going to win for the next 5. So the plans are kind of the plans, because you need to build long-term financial outcomes. I get all of that stuff, but you've got to, I think more importantly, the culture of the business and how it adjusts and flexes when the situations change is way more important. And that's why we wear, phrases like culture eats strategy for breakfast, because the ability to capture these things. Now, it doesn't mean you're not connected to a purpose or a vision or a long-term ambition, but you've got to be able to adjust.
Yeah.
There's no question of that. What is the data is that what you asked me, what data I would...
Yeah, did you have any research that feeds into these, or more specifically, like, what tools are you using, and what tools do you like to use, which tools do you avoid using?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of, at a core level, distinctive asset tracking is very important. I think particularly if you've got a big brand that's got a few, or if you're trying to build something that you think is distinctive for the long term, I think looking at that at least once a year is a really important thing to do, because if you don't get that right, then you don't get your consistency right, and then all this investment that you're making in marketing activity might not work. I think duplication of purchase is another great thing. So we've done some work on that, obviously, but I think it identifies, particularly in the short and medium-term horizon, where some of your gaps might be. Now, it doesn't necessarily give you the answer for how you might fill the petition need, but it definitely does help shape. I think every couple of years you want to be doing a big U&A. Now, how you do it isn't, I don't think, well prescribed, but if you get a U&A right, that should, I kind of see all the scan data and all of your transaction data as sort of looking in the rear vision mirror. But if you're going to look out over the bonnet long term, how you get some of the themes that might define what the future is about. So the reason I say every couple of years is because all 3 or 4 years maybe consumer behaviour doesn't change that much, and then you're trying to bolt together enough pieces of work to say that these are the things that are starting to move. And then the last one that I spend a fair bit of time on as well is just a genuine category strategy. So if you take all of the bits and pieces and you go, okay, what's your best guess about where the category might go, then you've got a pretty clear roadmap, at least where to start fishing, which is, you've got a bit more time. I do think in Australia we'd certainly benefit from single source, but we're probably a bit like others in that you're trying to bolt different databases together. We don't necessarily, I think there'll be a good opportunity coming with one of the data suppliers soon enough. But I mean, that's kind of the sort of completes the loop for me in terms of copy effectiveness. I use PackSolve quite a bit as well. Like, I'm not a big fan of pack changes, but if we're improving distinctive asset recognition and time to find, I think that's a useful piece of work. And then probably sensory is the other one. I mean, we spend a lot of time on it in pet care. Sensory was palatability for dogs and cats, but understanding whether you are good enough is an important thing to constantly be doing. You don't want to over-engineer so you don't make money, as I said, but you don't want to make a product that might be a barrier to penetration in the long term as well. So they're probably the major ones. There's nothing really groundbreaking there, I would say. You're just trying to be systematic about it and do them fairly regularly so that you've got some data that you can sort of piece together over time. I mean, every supplier's got more scan than you can sort of possibly digest. It's like working with the right people to get the inside out of the scan is the key. So
yeah. Perfect. That's an awesome answer. I feel like I've taken up a huge amount of your time. I mean, just to give everyone perspective, when we started the podcast, you were actually clean shaven.
It's like Benjamin Button. Maybe if I started a bit longer, I'll go back to when I was 18 again.
But the thing that I'd like to finish on is just, do you have any, I don't know, I suppose it's more like life advice or any words of wisdom that you'd like to pass on to people?
That sounded like a righteous tit. No, it's probably, I can only share what I think is helping me, which is, I mean, I talked about curiosity at the start of the podcast.
Yeah.
But in what you're doing and on yourself are really important things to focus on. If you've got that real understanding of yourself, it'll help you in lots of ways. Firstly, how you interact with people, how you turn up. It'll help you sort of get to the things that really sort of float your boat, blow your hair back. So curiosity is a big thing. And then what else would I say? I think empathy for others and the things they have to do would really help. And then just investing in you over a long, whether it's reading, good industry partnerships, mentors, if there's training, learning and development opportunities within your organisation, or whether you identify some outside, I think they would really help you along. They're probably the main ones for me. If I probably put it a bit more simply, if you can try and absolve your sense of self in life and spend more time thinking about how you're going to contribute to it rather than what you're going to get from it, you'll end up in a really good place, which, you know, that sort of person turns up with a service mindset and is trying to navigate their egos and is really helping trying to help others do well and organisations do well, and it brings a calm, enthusiastic demeanour to life. Like they're the kind of people I reckon that get there over time, because you'll see and hear things that you won't hear if you're very focused on yourself. So I'm nowhere near a perfection on it, but I think it's really interesting as a central tenet which will help you over time. So they're probably the major ones without sounding like Gandhi or Yoda or combined.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, curiosity and, you know, having that service mindset and what can you give rather than what you can take.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a big, I reckon the world benefits from it a lot, but it's hard sometimes when you're in the cut and thrust of a competitive environment, which organisations are. Like it's a battlefield, right? Like, because, you know, there's people internally, there's, you know, trying to beat competition, there's external influences, but none of it particularly helps. You've got your eyes on the wrong things. You know, competitors will make you better, yeah, but if you're forever pining over whatever someone else has got or what you haven't got, you're really going to, I think, long-term, your ability to be transformational is limited.
Yeah, you'd be miserable at home and at work.
Yeah, it's hard, right? There's so much in the world that you can't control.
Yeah.
There's a small amount of things that you can do that really well, and then just see what happens.
And you're always going to find, you know, people who earn slightly more money than you or have been to slightly more countries, people that are smarter. So you just have to focus on, being your competition should be yourself, and who your competition was yesterday. Yeah,
I think that's right. It just helps you employ better people and have smarter people around you. Like, it's when you absolve yourself, it's a really powerful tool for opening up possibility.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Ryan.
Thank you, Zac.
I've learned heaps. I mean, we've been chatting for almost 2 hours, and holy, that just flew by for me. So yeah, this is going to be amazing.
Maybe it won't be as enriching when you listen to it played back, but let's see.
I'm sure it is. I always listen to it probably about 3 times actually before it actually goes to air. So yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to cutting this all up and giving everyone those little slices.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't use any foul language too, which is usually a hallmark of me. I'll be well behaved on your podcast.
Amazing. I really appreciate it. Awesome. Thanks heaps, Ryan.
Cheers.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.